You're listening to World of Empowerment Radio, your station for practical spirituality in a changing world. And here are your hosts, Aingeal Rose and Ahonu.
Hi, I am Ahonu, and with me is my lovely Aingeal Rose. We've just concluded a chapter of Aingeal Rose's forthcoming book called A Time of Change. In that, the final chapter is called The Ending of Evil. And to arrive at this chapter, we went into the Akashic Records and asked some very important questions about evil. And we'd like to share those with you now. And the book will be launched very, very shortly. And we do encourage you to get a copy because it's very, very pertinent to this time that we're in, with so much going on in the world. And these questions, and the answers to these questions especially, are critical for our understanding of what's going on. So have a listen and enjoy.
I immediately saw this beautiful royal blue and violet light. And what that was a confirmation for me that we are in truth today. We are in Source has heard us. It knows what we're going to be asking. And then I also, after that, saw red. And the feeling I got immediately was the contrast between the frequencies. In other words, when you're in royal blue and violet, it's very uplifting. It's lofty. It's spiritual. You're in these higher energies of truth. And when I see the red, it looks like a much denser vibration. And I felt like it was telling me the contrast between the spiritual and the material in terms of frequencies is that, and maybe it is going to be all about frequencies, but the higher colors do seem to be more godlike, if you will. The lower ones seem to be functioning at such a slow vibration. In other words, that in and of itself is a bit of a limitation in terms of the contrast of what I'm seeing. That's initially what I got. Did you get anything initially?
I did. I got what looked like packages coming into our consciousness, and they were like what might be called a payload. Like, say in military warfare, an airplane would be carrying explosives. They call that the payload. I suppose a way for them to overcome the evil that it might be carrying. A nice way to say that they're carrying something that's going to have some payback for somebody. But anyway, irrespective of that, it was like there was these packages of payload in our consciousness. And our questions will be, of course, how to get out of that or relieve that or remove that or whatever. But that's what I was seeing, was these packages that are in our thinking, in our awareness, in our bodies, perhaps, in our DNA, maybe. I don't know. We'll find out. But there's this payload that we're carrying. And then the other thing I saw was that there was scratches on our, let's say if you could call it our blueprint. Because I was seeing a kind of a drawing, like you might say an architect's drawing of a building, or a drawing, a blueprint of our body, and it had these scratches on it. And those scratches seemed to me to be the subject of our discussion today. That, in other words, what we think might be perfect or should be perfect has these scratches and imperfections on it. So that's what I saw initially.
Okay.
Okay, our first question, Aingeal Rose. What is Source's definition of evil?
I'm first seeing actually beautiful yellow light, like sunshine, which is kind of an odd thing to see first, but I know Source well enough to know if I don't start there, it won't give me the rest. So what I hear Source saying from its perspective, it doesn't see evil. It doesn't acknowledge evil. There's no definition of evil because to it, there's only love and sunshine. And that's what it's acknowledging as the only truth. Can't say anything more than that about it.
Well, our next question, you may already have answered it. What does Source have to say about evil in our world?
What I'm seeing is it's souls that so don't know that they're loved and don't believe that they're loved, that it really is sad. I feel sadness around this when I ask Source that question, is like it's saying, my poor children, they don't know or realize the love that's there. Devoid of love is what the answer really is, devoid of love. But I feel injury attached to it. It didn't just happen that way. It's like it became that way through probably traumas. Could it be through lifetimes of who knows? But it seems to come out of its creatures feeling devoid of love or being devoid of love.
Funny you should use that word devoid, because when you break it up, it says devoid.
Yeah.
Okay, our next question. Does God see any good in evil?
No, I don't think it sees any good in evil. I don't feel that it has a purpose, because it's kind of the same question. I don't see that evil has a purpose. In other words, there's no good purpose to evil, but it does require us being able to come more into love itself. Because as it's reminding us, love doesn't exclude. Love has compassion. Love has caring. In other words, it wouldn't be something that Source says you have to try to abolish evil, because it's an effect. Evil is an effect of creatures that are feeling devoid of love. So the correction is always to offer compassion and actually not be invested in healing it, which is an interesting answer. It's more of a place it wants us to hold in our hearts or our minds, because it's not everything's ready to be healed or receive love. But within ourselves, it's asking us to, instead of looking upon it with hatred, which only makes it bigger, actually, if we could hold in our hearts compassion and forgiveness. Forgiveness isn't even the right word. It's using forgiveness in the sense of erasing in our hearts the trauma that perhaps beings that are evil have experienced. Okay? If we could hold a space of higher compassion and love, that's what it was asking us to do. And it's being clear to say it's a place to hold in our heart, not to take an action. In other words, don't go thinking you're going to go heal every evil person or try to fix them, because it's not the answer either. It's already coming from a place of rejection.
I've got an interesting answer. That in this dimensional space where we are, we're familiar with the sun shining light on something. So there's light coming from a source. And we've equated that with light coming from God. But there's a flaw in that thinking. And the flaw is that the light from the sun, or a candle or an artificial light of any kind, casts a shadow. And that's what's causing the perception of shadow or evil. Now, in the eyes of God, Source, the light is everywhere. So it doesn't cast a shadow. So there's no shadow in the light of God. That's the difference between the way we perceive light and the way God perceives light. And that's our perception then of where evil is. Evil lies in the shadows.
Right, because it's even reminding us, a simple analogy is that On a cloudy day, when the sun's not shining through, people's moods change. They get a little down. And sometimes if it's cloudy for too long, they just, oh, I'm in darkness. But Source is reminding us that beyond the clouds is always the sun. The sun is always shining, even if it's a cloudy day. And that's the constant. The light of God is always shining, just like you said. Shadows are really an illusion.
The next question is a play on the word evil, because devil just has a single letter in front of it, D, evil. Is there such a thing as a devil?
You know, how Source is answering that is that there is de-evolution. There are creatures out there, Sources say, that do wreak havoc and that do try to thwart life or happiness. There are forces out there that do that. And again, it wants us to remember who we're talking about. We're talking about damaged spirits or souls who cannot embrace the light of God or love. So misery loves company. So of course there's creatures that are interested in bringing other people into their darkness or destroying the light because they could be angry at God or angry at somebody. So there's an element of anger there in terms of revenge. There are creatures, and we could call that a devil, as yes, there are beings that would be considered devils.
Or de-evolved beings.
De-evolved or devils that are interested in the de-evolution of the light. So yes, the answer to that is yes.
Next question. Will evil forces take over our world at this time?
I just got dizzy when you asked that question. Isn't that interesting? I don't see that. You know, what Sources say to me is that there's more love and good in the world. What I got was a picture of the good in the world being this beautiful blue that I started with, that is pervading across the world, this beautiful love. You do have the forces of darkness. They look like they're beneath the surface. In other words, they're not this all-encompassing round global energy. They look like they're subterranean. So no, I don't think that they're going to take over the world. They look like they emerge and they cause all kinds of troubles, and this has been throughout history, is that they bubble up from underground and they try to, but sources of love and light are stronger because love is the strongest element in the universe, and it's still present. It's still all pervasive. So no, I don't think that they're going to take over the world.
Can there ever be an end to evil in general?
Yes, when all the broken hearts are healed. But you know, it takes a higher consciousness of the people to understand that that's part of what loving means, is to not have hatred for anything. We have to resolve hatred within ourselves. We have to basically purify our hearts so that we don't go to evil desires ourselves or hatred desires when we're confronted with negative forces. It wants us to hold a space of love, like it said before, without thinking that you have to go save the world.
You're answering the next question that was, is there anything we could or should be doing to help end evil? And what you're saying is hold love as the highest.
Yeah, I feel like we have to move into the higher frequencies of love. In other words, it's interesting that when I go into these records, for example, and Source is present, I'm immediately moved into this beautiful, peaceful, loving intelligent, higher place of being. I'm uplifted. Just like I said when I started, there's beautiful royal blue and violet, and I'm in these higher realms where there is no negativity at all. There isn't any. And so while I'm in it, I'm in it. But as soon as I close the records and I'm in my normal life, I don't always maintain that frequency. And what it's saying is that we all need to be moving our consciousness into the higher realms of being and love. And that requires self-examination, self-purification. So we have a responsibility in ourselves to heal our own belief in darkness and its effect on us. Like you mentioned earlier, we all have shadow areas that aren't healed in us. Could be our own trauma. It could be our own misperceptions of what God's all about. So we have our responsibility to raise ourselves into a higher place of dignity.
I'm getting an answer to that in the light of what I got earlier on about the payload. And you remember a few years ago, we interviewed a man who was charged in the Air Force with carrying an atomic bomb. And he actually refused under threat of a military tribunal and being dishonorably discharged and court-martialed and all of that. But he refused. To me, that was an enormous act of courage. And it's like that I think we're being challenged to say, are you going to continue carrying this payload in your consciousness? Or are you going to refuse to carry it anymore and only carry love? And perhaps that analogy is perfect in the sense that that does require a step up, as you say, a step up into the higher realms, a step up into consciousness, a step into courage that says, no, I'm refusing it. Despite all these threats against me, I'm refusing to carry an evil payload with me. And, as soon as I said that, it felt as if that blueprint with the scratch in it was erased, that you had a perfect blueprint.
Well, I'm also getting Source wants to remind us that the higher levels are where true power is. On the one hand, it's saying it's not asking us to condone or accept actions that harm people. For example, let's just say you're in an abusive situation and the person abusing you is considered evil. It's not asking you to put up with that indefinitely. It's telling you on the level of physicality, you would take an action to remove that influence out of a situation. However, you have to do it, right? But this is talking about on the level of true healing when you're asking the question, will we ever not have evil in this world? It has to be done from a higher level of inward cleansing for ourselves, for others, for the idea of evil in general. But not on a physical level when there are situations, sources calling it very mundane, those situations, in comparison to what we're talking about. You would remove a criminal from a situation. You would remove those that are trying to enforce evil. You'd put them away somewhere, or you'd take them out of society. But you can do that with sanity, with compassion.
In a polarized universe, does it mean both good and evil are in everyone and everything?
Source is first explaining polarization. It's saying that in healthy polarization, it's forces of nature that act upon each other to cause growth. Stimulus, in other words, right? Positive and negative, electrical and magnetic. It's using those examples and saying those things are forces of nature, when they're healthy, that catalyze growth. In relation to what we're talking about, that type of polarization is an illusion. So on the level that you're asking, no, good and evil are not in everyone, but trauma is in most people. So most people have an element of quote unquote darkness or unhealed issues inside of them. And the disadvantage also of coming down to a densification. So you would consider the material universe, the red light I spoke of earlier. Coming down into a densification has an element of forgetting to it.
So the material universe and polarized universe is not evil in and of itself.
No, it's denser. No, the physical universe is not evil. In fact, if you could see it correctly, it's quite magnificent. If you could look at it, if you were to see it vibrationally or energetically, you would see nothing but beauty everywhere. Even your physical bodies are made of light and sound. And if you could see it that way, it'd give you a whole different perspective. But it is saying that densification does have an element of forgetfulness attached to it. And so this is the reason why people forget Source. What I hear Source say is, this is why they forget me. And also because of that, they lose their own sense of identity.
We've got 3 questions coming together. Does evil exist outside of ourselves? Does it exist in other planes of existence? And is evil the same in all dimensions?
Well, Source is going to say yes to that, only because the evil that may exist in you, let's say, as an individual, is your evil. And we're talking evil equating to shadow, to unhealed trauma, to our own darkness, personal evil. The evil that would exist in you and the evil that would exist in me might not be the same.
But collectively, it's the same. Is that what you're saying?
Well, collectively, it's defining evil as the shadow in each of us. So can it exist outside of us personally? Yes. In other words, in the context that your evil might not be the same as mine. You could have more evil and I could have less, and somebody else might have a different proportion.
So this is the proportion of how much we love or don't love ourselves, effectively.
Effectively.
So does evil exist?
There are other planes of existence that have the same problem, same conditions. Yes, there are.
And is that evil in those other planes of existence the same in all the dimensions? In other words, is it all the lack of love or the forgetting of love?
It would all be the same, yes. I feel such sorrow from Source when you ask that question. As Source considers it sad that unfortunately, yes, there are many of my creations that are not aware of my love. But devoid of love is what I keep saying. Devoid of love, which equals devolution.
Coming right down now to the earth plane again. Will we ever have a positive world here where we aren't constantly fighting for survival against evil?
You know, what I'm feeling is that we may always have some form of evil here. And it's putting it in context to say that we have to consider how vast is the universe, how old is the earth, how many millions of years we have been in existence, how many elements and life forms there are. It's also wanting to include that evil isn't just people. There's evil in animals. There's evil in plant life. There's evil in elements, the way some have come together. It's pervasive. We may not have the proportion that we have now. In other words, as I was seeing that contrast before about love being so pervasive on the earth and the darkness being sub, it looked like it was half and half. When you ask that question, it looks like the degree of love is 3/4 or even more, and the darkness is diminished. So you could look forward to the diminishment of it, where it really isn't a problem anymore. In other words, when it comes up, collective looks like it deals with it compassionately right away. But to say that you'll never have that surface, I'm not seeing that at this point.
Last question. Can evil be forgiven? And what does the forgiveness of evil look like?
We've already answered that with Source's answers. It would say forgiveness is the same as compassion. So, are you meaning it in a different way? Are you meaning forgiveness? What way are you asking the question? I get the feeling you have some preconceived idea about the word forgiveness.
Well, it's coming from the word forgiven. So, is it a foregone conclusion that evil is, as you say, just a lack of love or a suffering from trauma or a distancing from God's love that, in a sense, never happened in the first place, but it's our perception that it did? So the question is, can that perception be forgiven? And what does that forgiveness of evil look like for us on the earth?
Well, it looks like it's already been forgiven because God has never stopped loving or caring or offering more and more opportunities for awakening to love. So it's already been forgiven in that nothing has been rejected or cast out. Nothing's ever banished from love. So in that sense, any evil's already been corrected and forgiven.
So the ending of evil has already happened.
It has already happened from Source's point of view, but not from us. That's why when we first began the sessions, we asked Source for a definition of evil. It was showing me that, well, I can't really relate to that even. I can't embrace it as a reality, even though it is answering the questions. Did I answer that last question?
Yes, you did.
Okay.
In fact, you answered it beautifully, and it brings us to the end on a joyful note, actually, that the ending of evil is already here. It's already done.
Yes.
Already done.
Yeah.
So we hope you enjoyed that. You can get hold of the book. There's a link down below where you can get it on Amazon or indeed where good books are sold all around the world. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact myself, Ahonu, or Aingeal Rose. Again, links are down below. So stay in touch with us, stay strong, feel the love, and bye-bye for now.
You have been listening to Aingeal Rose and Ahonu on World of Empowerment Radio, your station for practical spirituality in a changing world.